And viewers, curtains have come down on the 24-year rule of Bashar Al-Assad in Syria. Syrian rebels have seized control of the capital Damascus after a lightning advance that sent President Bashar Al-Assad fleeing to Russia after a 13-year civil war. Moscow has given asylum to Assad and his family. But before we decode the impact of developments in Syria, let's take a look at how Assad's rule came to an end in just 11 days. Let's take a look at what really has happened over here. This is in fact where the area of Syria was on the 26th of November. This is where the Syrian government in red actually had control. The yellow part is where the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces were in power. And this is the HTS-led area, that small patch in green that you see on 27th of November. It expands to virtually all parts of the country. And of course, we've seen how the other parts, which included Turkish-aligned Syrian rebel forces, were concerned. Now, this includes several of the big cities in Syria, including Aleppo, including capital Damascus, that are now firmly in their control. And this is what has really led to Bashar al-Assad actually moving out of the country. Let's look at how Assad's exit will impact the Middle Eastern region. Iran and Hezbollah. Iran's supply chain to Hezbollah now is compromised. There will be delay in refurbishment of Hezbollah's military capability, and Israel could approach to a ceasefire also that is likely to change following all of this. The war in Gaza, an indirect effect expected there in the ongoing war in Gaza, where Israel can make military victory the focus now. What about American stakes? The Russian absence has strengthened America's stakes in this region, and in fact, Trump indicating that they are going to lay their hands off this particular crisis also has really raised a lot of speculation on what America's role will be. India is also watching these developments with concern, and here's why. In terms of the political and economic risks, uncertainty around India's investments in this entire region in IT, oil, energy sectors, also the possibility of takeover by fundamentalist groups could jeopardize India's interests in this particular region. Security concerns as well as increased terror risks from a destabilized Syria could potentially be there as well. And also the fact that India's security interests require vigilance in this entire region. Also, strategic investments could potentially be in danger. Uncertainty over the India-Middle East-Europe economic corridor. This corridor is a strategic priority for India's global trade ambitions. And there could be a geopolitical recalibration, with India having to recalibrate strategy with the changing Syrian landscape and a need to balance relationships with key players like Turkey, Iran and the Gulf states. There's a breaking update coming in, and following the recent developments after rebels took over Syria, Indian UN peacekeepers are on high alert. The total strength of the Indian Army deployment as part of the United Nations Disengagement Observer Force mission in Syria is 145, and if the situation demands troops can be evacuated for that contingency plan is being worked out, is what sources are telling us. Also, that if need arises, Indian troops can be brought to Israel for protection. Sources are indicating that the Indian Army is closely monitoring the situation as well, and UN has issued an advisory to the peacekeepers. They've been advised to stay in controlled areas for safety, and they've been asked to prevent exposure. And joining us now is Lieutenant General Syed Hasnain, who's a Defense and Strategic Affairs analyst. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. And let me begin by asking you, as the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or the HTS, has captured Damascus in a short span of about 11 days, and a major chunk of Syria in this particular unprecedented move is concerned, what do you expect will happen in coming days as far as Syria is concerned? And also, how will this move affect the entire Levant region?
Thank you for that question, and thank you for inviting me for your program. Yes, this is what everyone is asking at the moment. The meltdown which has taken place in Syria, why has it happened and what does it bode for the future? Well, to my mind, this primarily happened because Iran somehow has got diluted in its overall military strength, with its focus on the Levant and this focus on Lebanon and partially on Gaza, a supply of much of its hardware there, and the overall, should I say, dilution of the capability of the Hezbollah. The military capability of Iran has become very questionable. Secondly, Russia, which played such a major role 2015 to 2018 in defeating the ISIS, they too have been weakened hugely because of the Ukraine war. They have not been able to devote that kind of attention this side, and you saw last week a very weak kind of a counterattack which was put in by the Russian Air Force with the intent of trying to secure their interests in the Mediterranean, primarily in the area of the Latakia port, right? And lastly, I would say that it's also because of Hafiz Assad's own activities of not allowing any democratization within the Syrian society. And that is very evident from the fact that celebrations are going on in Damascus for his departure from Damascus. So having said this, obviously militarily HTS has gained tremendously. I mean, this kind of a approach and this kind of a success in a matter of 10, 11 days was never expected. Now, will there be a counter-offensive? Will there be a counter-attempts by Iran and Russia, etc.? I don't think it will happen immediately. For the simple reason the Russians seem to have already vacated their bases, and the Iranians, the IRGC particularly, seems to have got weakened to a great extent and will not want to divert attention from the area of South Lebanon at this particular time.
Right.
So I think it's the HTS all the way up, but it also depends on how the HTS treats the situation at the moment.
Yeah, but if the HTS itself, if I can just come in there, Lieutenant General, because the HTS itself and its leader Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, he is a former acquaintance of ISIS chief Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in Syria. He's also someone who has pledged allegiance towards Al-Qaeda. Now, this kind of a takeover of such a person, of these credentials, how does that impact Middle East and perhaps even India? Because India is a country with which had diplomatic ties with the Bashar al-Assad regime.
In fact, India has had fairly good ties with Syria all this while, and we do have a fair amount of deployment of our interests in there. We have actually invested a fair amount of money in Syria itself, so we do have commercial interests going at the moment. But having said that, I don't think Jilani is in a position to do too much at the moment, because you see, we must always remember Syria has got far too many players, and perhaps Jilani, a young man comparatively, just 42, 43 years old, is looking at some kind of a consolidation before he can do anything further. And he may not want to get involved in a civil war kind of a situation as it happened in the earlier years. So to my mind, I think he is going to play it quite cool comparatively, not the typical Al-Qaeda, not the typical ISIS kind of a approach which we saw in 2014 and 15. He will want to consolidate because he knows that there are lots of other forces which are also looking and focusing towards this area. The Levant is everybody's area. Everybody looks at it as a very important strategic asset.
Right. Right. Also, in terms of India itself, do you see India recalibrating its strategy as far as Middle East is concerned? And also, of course, not just with the developments in Syria, but also, of course, the multiple fronts of fighting that are taking place in the Middle East?
Well, for one thing, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has invested a lot of time, a lot of resources in building the relationship over the last 10 years in the Middle East. You can see after the Abraham Accords, we had been able to achieve the Western Quad, which had come into being: Israel, India, UAE, United States. We also saw the advent of the India, Middle East, European corridor, which has not yet, of course, fructified, but it was in the making. All these were generally in our strategic interest. The other fact remains that almost $45 billion worth of remittances come from this area every year, the Gulf region, and there are almost 9 million Indians who are there as a part of the diaspora. So we have to be concerned about turbulence. We have to be concerned about the security of this area at all times. I don't think there will be any recalibration as such. It's much like what happened in Afghanistan, where you find that we don't have even diplomatic relations with Afghanistan, but at the same time, India has ensured its interests by making sure that there's an outreach to Afghanistan. And this is what I think will happen at this moment also, an outreach to this organization the HTS at this time, obviously balancing out the fact that we have a very strong relationship with Iran at the same time. So I think everything has to be waited for and watched at the particular moment.
Right. Also, the reason I was asking you the question previously is that we know that there is a war going on as far as Israel is concerned with Lebanon and Gaza. HTS's capture of Syria, in that sense, very critical for Israel and the United States. We've seen Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu come out and hail Assad's downfall as a historic day. He says it's a significant blow to Iran's access. He's also termed Assad's regime as oppressive. On the other hand, US President-elect Trump has tweeted on Syria saying that this isn't our fight, let it play out, do not get involved. What is this really going to suggest in terms of how US is going to be looking at it? Will it no longer be a major player in Middle East conflicts, unlike in the past?
That's a very interesting set of questions that you really put to me. First thing, let me say, it is all to the advantage of Israel, militarily particularly, because the continuity of the territory of Levant, which was available to Iran to do the resupply of all the missilery, rockets, etc., which went to the Hezbollah, that would probably come to an end at this stage. And you will find a dilution of Hezbollah capability, a dilution of Iran's capability to fight proxy war in this particular area. Northern Israel, southern Lebanon, the threat, to my mind, will recede to a great extent, allowing Israel to focus on the southern front, on the Gaza front, and perhaps even go for a potential military victory. Having said that, the United States, and I think Mr. Trump is following the absolutely correct policy, hands off. He does not want to get mixed into this. This happened the last time also. If you remember, in 2014-15, the United States backed the Syrian Democratic Forces. They didn't get involved into running battles with the ISIS, etc. That was left to Iran, the Iraqi militia, and the Russians to do all that. The Americans have been smart. They've kept out of it. And I think with this kind of an approach, their interests are being adhered to.
Thank you so much, sir, for taking the time out and speaking to us here on Times Now.
Thank you very much for that.